Different tuning pegs may require different thicknesses of headstock. It's always a good idea to buy your pegs first. The ones I'm using for this headstock require 14 millimeters. I've scribed a line on both sides with a cutting gauge, and we've used a pencil to go over that line so we can see it. And what we want to do is to create a nice gentle curve right up to where the nut is going to go. This is a 50 millimeter diameter bobbin sander. It's set up in the pillar drill. I've set it with there's a waste hole cut in here so that it can sit in without touching the metal base. I've clamped it with 2 clamps. And what we need to do now is to set up a fence. Now, the best way to do this is to take a square piece of wood. It's square to the base. And it needs to be 14 millimeters. This is a 14 millimeter stick, so we can just use this to set the depth. And when we're happy that we've got it, we then put a second clamp on. And the second clamp should ensure it stays in position. So here we have the headstock design from the plans. This is like a simple paddle headstock. First thing we need to do is to re-establish the center line that was lost when we sanded. Check. You can use your marking gauge just to double check we've got the actual center line. Same again, if we mark the center line on the neck. Reason for doing this was we want to make sure that the pegs are laid out correctly. We can trace some things over, but because it just gives us a reference point. Just marking out the peg positions. Okay. Important not to get confused here because you have this is the 0 fret, and that's the part where the nut will be cut into. We'll cut that in once we've shaped the head. Now the length of the head on this example is 106. That's from the top to where the nut will be. The nut is about 5 millimeters. So if you allow 5 millimeters, so if you can mark on this one, you can do it better from the side, I suspect. Where the 5 millimeters will be. And then 106. I'm just going to take that around the sides to the back. To drill out these holes, we're going to use a 10 millimeter bit. This is a Forstner bit, so it's very clean cutting. We drill from the top because that's obviously the back is flat, and we want the pegs to be perfectly straight, perpendicular. What we're going to do is glue some tape to the back. What we do is we apply a couple of dots of super glue to glue the headstock to the scrap piece of wood. A couple of dabs super glue. Okay, so with the headstock drilled out for now, what we need to do is remove the waste. So we're going to cut this off up here as close, maybe a millimeter to the pencil line if we can. And the same on this side, we're going to use some saw cuts. We do this by hand. I'm going to use the bandsaw to get it done quickly, but so we're just going to do some waste cuts, and then we're going to do the rest of the shaping using a bobbin sander for this part. Last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to cut the nut slots. Before we put the frets in, it's a good time to prepare the place where the nut is going to go. The nut is 5mm wide and it sits 4mm deep. There are several ways to do it. You can route this out. You can, if you're very careful, use set your marking gauge to 5mm. Put a mark on either side. Always good to mark it on with a pencil so you know you don't want to saw any deeper than that line. You can just leave a complete. I try to do this so that there is a little groove for the nut to sit in, similar to the way it's done on a Fender electric guitar. But I leave a little groove for the nut to sit in, that way it sits in. It can also sit on a shelf if you just want to cut this off and have this sitting with a spot of glue on a shelf here, that work also. The good thing about this kind of nut is the 0 fret does all the work. It sets the height of the action on the 1st fret. The nut here, the white bone or plastic nut, all that does is guide the strings to the string positions. I've measured 5mm away from the slot. So this is the 0 slot, and that's the place where the nut's going to go. It's already been cleaned out to 5mm. I'm going to use the fretting saw. The same saw that we used for cutting the frets. This has a depth gauge on it. I'm adjusting this so it's to 4mm. We want about a 4mm cut. Okay, now the flush side of this saw is going to make the start. Once we've got the saw cut nicely, we can actually now with the saw, this is very complicated now, with the saw cut I can move back to the way I prefer cutting it. Put it on this side. When it starts to rub on the bottom, it will no longer cut. So in theory, and it can't cut any deeper on either side. Perfect. You should be able to just take your time with this and be cautious of using the chisel. You're trying to keep everything flat. Now you've got this line here that you put in with the marking gauge, and that's what you're going to feel when you get to the end of this. My advice is to just take it down to the level nice and slowly. I'm just going to switch it over to the other side here. We'll do exactly the same. We're going to use a smaller chisel just to start with. It should all come away nicely, but I don't want anything to chip off. I mean, you can glue it back with super glue if you really have to. And you can feel the mark, the line there with the knife. Slightly wider chisel. This is the mortise chisel. To finish this off, what you can do is you can take a piece of paper. This is to protect, we don't want to wear away this edge, but we do want to use the file at the bottom using the straight edge of the file. There we go. It just leaves a nice flat seat. So when we finally, I've got the nuts ready here at the moment. So when the nut goes in, this is not a good example, but yeah, so there's no rocking when the nut goes in. We're just wetting the fretboard. This allows us to see where we need to sand. This raises any grain, any dents in the wood. If there are any other larger dents, we may take a steam iron, but okay, we just let that dry for a little while and then come back to it. And then we'll sand again with the 180 grit sandpaper block. We want to get this fretboard to the level of finish. So we'll get it to the stage where we've sanded it as fine as we can, and then we're going to seal this before we put the frets in. Okay, so we've allowed this to dry a little bit. Given the roughness of the wood, I've decided what I'll do is I'm actually going to knock it back with some 120 grit. So I'll place one piece of 120 sandpaper over the 180 for now. Taking out any deep scratches, any marks. We're trying to do it evenly. We don't want to sand any hollows at this stage. Especially the nut end, we don't want that to go lower. Actually, there is some benefit in having this sanding very slightly lower. So we've gone down to 120, then we go back to the 180. Make sure we don't round over the edges yet. We won't do that till after the instrument's been fretted. We can now move on to 240 grit. I'm actually going to use a smaller sanding block, I think, for this. This is 240. Now, some woods like oak, you would stop here. I'm going to move on to 320 in a minute. Okay. Some 320 paper. So finish this off, we're just going to go over with some wire wool, which just removes mostly the dust. Okay, so lastly, we're going to seal this now. Just going to apply a tiny amount. This is Osmo. This is an oil that dries. This is clear Osmo oil. You can use Danish oil. You can use linseed oil. This is to seal the surface. This is the finish we'll be using on the back of the neck when we're done. So we're just getting the little head here. Doesn't require much oil. What we'll actually do, we'll probably provide about 3 coats. I'll put a coat on today, tomorrow, and then the next day before we get to the stage of stopping. So I think that's about done now, I think. Yeah, I like to get about 3 coats on. If you just rub a tiny dot on, rub it in, leave it there for 1 day, come back. You can then sand it with wire wool, apply another coat, leave it another day, and do the same again. Make sure you put these in the toilet when you're finished. These mustn't be left around because it's oil and it can self-combust. That's all we can do for now. Again, we're finishing this because once we get the frets in, we won't touch the fingerboard. So it's good to have a varnish. You can use shellac. You could use a water-based or polyurethane finish if that's easier for you. Yeah, that's all we could do for now. And then we'll come back to this in a few days' time once we finish the coats.